How many of us have seen this advertisement? Maybe seen it in its original state, or since then, you've come a long way, baby. You know that your movement has at least made some success when the racist capitalist heteropatriarchy stops ignoring you and instead attempts to co-opt your message in its advertising. We'll return to this later. A few decades ago, I and some of my nerd friends ran for office in the River Valley High School Library Club. I did say we were nerds. There were 5 of us in our group, and there were 3 other, even less popular nerds in the library club, too. And the 5 of us divided the positions up before the election. We knew we had the votes to elect our slate every time. At one point, the other smaller group did have a very clever attempt to split our block, and they nominated another one of our people to try and split our vote. We did respect their attempt, recognized what they were doing. We conferred, agreed that we would stick to our plan, and continued going forward. We could have abused our power even further. Had we been in high school longer, we could have changed the voting process. We could have required every candidate for library club to have taken Algebra 2 already, which was not a widely popular class take. We could have created our own test that you had to pass in order to be elected to the library club leadership. And of course, the test we would have created would have been all sorts of in-jokes and information that only we knew. We could have required voting to occur only during a certain class period and only in the science lab, where most other students weren't allowed, but one of us did have permission to access. This is a trivial example, and we know there are many worse examples in the real world these days. For example, the voter suppression happening right now. I am just completely outraged about what's going on in our world. They're closing voting precincts. The ones that are open have fewer hours, unless, of course, you're in a rich white suburb. There's no longer Sunday voting in some places. Now they're removing mail sorting machines and tearing out mailboxes entirely. How many of you are also outraged by this blatant corruption? And then I imagine how outraged I would be if I had never been allowed to vote, and if I were told daily that I didn't deserve it because of these reasons, with a long list afterwards. Incandescent rage. So what are we celebrating today? I'll stop you right there. If you were going to say women's suffrage, you would be wrong. The 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution effectively only gave white women the vote. Asian American women weren't guaranteed the vote until 1952. Native women waited until 1957. And Black women weren't legally fully enfranchised until 1965. That's much less than 100 years. Here's a little bit of that history. We heard some of this from our Story for All Ages when Autumn read. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were abolitionists. They met as delegates at the World Anti-Slavery Society Convention in 1840. I say they were delegates, but they didn't actually get to participate because women weren't allowed. This is a big reason that they found each other, that they became friends, and that they helped create the first women's rights convention in the United States in Seneca Falls, New York, 8 years later. For a while, many people worked together to secure the vote for women and for people of color. In 1866, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Frederick Douglass were among those who created the American Equal Rights Association. For a few years, they did seem to be making progress toward all people. But the standard divide and conquer technique used by oppressors throughout history took its toll in this struggle, too. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution defined citizenship and granted equal protection, and it was the first time that the word male was used in our Constitution. Proponents of women's suffrage saw this as a sign they were losing. Those who wanted to grant equal rights to Black people saw that too, and realized that including women might hamper their own fight. Soon, Black speakers were belittling women again, and women, including Carrie Chapman Catt and our own beloved Olympia Brown, were making racist statements in their speeches. The 15th Amendment gave Black men the vote, and almost immediately the National Women's Suffrage Association was created without any mention of race in its charter. Catt and Brown and other women would eventually regret their words. They and others, although not all, did work for equality for all people later in their lives. Much like those women, I look back on the River Valley Library Club election with some chagrin. We could have shared power. We could have given one of our rival nerds a position in the club. But we were friends. It felt good to be part of an in-group. This was one of the few places that we had any power. We didn't want to share it. From such simple human impulses are great injustices born. All over the world, in-groups are acting to maintain their control and to prevent others from sharing in their power. Here in our United States, the party in power is working diligently to disenfranchise as many people as possible. In many states, ex-felons do not have their voting rights restored after they've completed their prison sentences and paid their debt to society. In virtually all states, poor people have to wait in long lines on a work day in order to cast their vote. Legislatures in several states have ended voting on Sundays, mostly because Black churches held Souls to the Polls events wherein whole congregations would go vote together. The best way to fix this travesty is to make sure that as many people who are still able to vote do vote. You know, the other nerds could have taken the library club if they had recruited folks from outside our usual nerd constituency. They could have assumed control if they had been willing to share their power with the Spanish Club or some of the future farmers of America. The best way to win elections is to widen the voter pool. And a good way to do that in our current context is to work with the voter engagement campaign of the Faith in St. Joseph County group. Just like they did in the last election, when Faith in Indiana helped to increase voter turnout by over 20% in some important demographics, we will be calling potential voters and giving them education and hope to help elect better representatives at the federal, state, and especially local level. Barb Carmichael and I are already enrolled in this program. When we call on you, please consider joining us for a few Thursday nights in September and October. If despair has been too convincing in your life of late, this is a great way to make hope possible. We began with the patronizing ad slogan, "You've come a long way, baby." We do celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment, and we recognize that too many people are still kept from voting one way or another. So here is an invocation. You, come along. Way more work to do. So may we be.